It's like, oh, you just broke your leg. You just failed this test. Your girlfriend just broke up with you. You just lost this client. Got it. Now what? It's being honest with yourself, even if the answers aren't that great. I think people who might not necessarily take a proactive decision may start to think that it's normal. And they might just start to say, oh, I guess this is what life is, right? I guess I have to be stressed and anxious and uncertain and afraid every day. And I just have to get used to this feeling. My shirt says be here. And so it's just a consistent reminder for me to not try and think about tomorrow, not try and think about yesterday, just be here and literally use whatever I have with whatever I got. When we try to be consistent with things, we try to be perfect with these things. And it's like, don't try to be perfect. Try to simply just outlast.
You're listening to the Real Business Connections Network. Real Business Connections Network. Powered by Balbert Marketing, LLC. Subscribe now and check us out at realbusinessconnections.com. Enjoy the show.
Preparation to this, literally right before we got on. I was just on your podcast, DJ. That was cool.
That was awesome. That was a great conversation. Got a little philosophical.
Libraries and weight rooms.
Libraries and weight rooms, the mind and the body.
So if people want to start there, I won't be mad if you go start there. It's in the show notes. Go start on that podcast where I got interviewed. But I was preparing for this interview today because I knew we were doing it back to back. And I saw you were on my buddy Brandon Eastman's show. Mm-hmm. And he mentioned right in the front of the show how you saw him speak. And then you were one of the only people that actually reached out and DM'd him and thanked him for the information. And then before you know it, you were landing on his podcast. And a second example is you showed up to one of my Grow Getters Only events and you actually sent me a handwritten letter afterwards. And we'll just start there. Why do you send out these handwritten letters to people that you kind of actually don't even know that well? But it caught my attention. It was kind. It was confident. You basically thanked me for putting on these events. Why do you do something like that?
I think in a world of social media and electronic connections, there's nothing like getting a little bit of tangibility sent to your address with, whether it's a package or whether it's a kindly thought out gift or a handwritten letter. I think that cuts through the noise a little bit. And I only really do it to people who did do something that really kind of helped me. And I really genuinely was appreciative of that networking event because in the letter, right? And the letter's public. So I think you posted it right on.
Posted it, yeah.
Yeah. So you can go read the letter. But I basically was talking about how networking to me, I think I gave it a negative connotation. Maybe it sounded a little salesy or I wasn't good at it, right? Maybe it was some of my own limiting beliefs around it. And you created this fairly comfortable environment where, right, it was a virtual one and we could come and we could talk to whether it was the speaker or go to breakout rooms. And I was like, this is actually much more enjoyable than I think I initially thought it was. So that prompted me to say, I want to show my gratitude and my appreciation because I don't know if people do say thank you enough to you, Ben, right? And I think too, when people put on events or people have masterminds or people do some sort of service to the world, it's cool to tell them, hey, by the way, all that work that you're doing, it's paying off and here's why. And letting them know that, right? Because I've had people do that to me and frankly, it brings me to tears sometimes because it's all right, those dark days, right, that we talked about on my show, right? Those dark days they're getting shown publicly, right? From somebody who was appreciative of you taking the time in those dark days. So that's ultimately why I decided to do it.
I appreciate it. I appreciate the disclaimer that you don't just do it for anybody. I actually earned the right to receive it.
Not everybody's going to get one.
the reason I bring it up isn't for anything about me. It's really, I started to see that you seem like the kind of person that does the extra rep. You're the kind of person that sends the letter, that sends the DM when you gain value from a speaker. Do you see yourself that way as the person who does that extra rep?
So it's funny you call it the extra rep because that's actually something that I do every day. So Ed Milet wrote a book called The Power of One More. And I actually haven't read the book yet, but I bought it and I have it. And every day when I do my workout in the morning, when I'm done with the workout and I'm completely exhausted and I'm laying in a pile of my own filth, sweat, sometimes blood, tears, everything, all the good stuff. Yeah. I turn around and I get down to the floor and I do one more push up. And it's like this little thing where it's like, all right, I know that I did one more, right? I know that I did one more little thing that was unrequired. And I remember that in my head. And I've actually only had one person ever make a note of, hey, you do one push up after every workout. And it was my old CrossFit gym owner in Rochester, New York. And when I left to go to Tampa, we did one more workout on a Saturday morning. Everybody came and it was like DJ's workout. And at the end of the workout, everybody had to do one push up. Right. So we completed the whole workout. And I asked him, I was like, you must have seen me. And he goes, I saw you. And he's like, the coolest thing is he never mentioned it to me. Like he never said, hey, I see you do that push up. He only said it when he actually made the workout. And he said, at the end, I put one extra push up because I see you do it each time. Right. And that like was a little sentimental to me. Right. I really liked that thing because now a whole gym of 40 plus people were doing one extra push up at the end of their workout.
That's cool. What a beautiful metaphor too, man. Everybody's doing that push up with you now. And
yeah,
where else in your life are you doing one more push up? Where else do you do that extra bit? Because I know you do the extra bit in writing a letter, sending a DM. You're doing the extra bit at the gym. Is this all areas of life? You tell me.
So I don't know if I've ever looked at it as like I'm doing extra. I think now it's become normal.
Yeah.
And maybe this is some coaching that I could get on this to like, hey, well, what's the next, plus one rep in this area of your life? Because I started taking certain areas of my life really serious in my early 20s when I was struggling with some stuff mentally. And I invested in this program called Optimize. And now I believe it's called Heroic. And it's run by a guy named Brian Johnson. And one of the things, my biggest takeaway from that program was the fundamentals of eating, moving, and sleeping. And those three areas of my life became my number one priorities. How do I eat? How do I move? And when I say move, both mentally and physically, and how do I sleep? And how do I do that on an everyday basis? And so I looked at kind of what I was doing in those areas and I said, all right, what would the next plus one rep look like in these areas? Right. Yeah. And so like sleep, I remember buying like a Fitbit and starting to track my sleep. And now I have a Garmin and eventually I want to get an Oura ring. Right. And so then I remember starting to count my macros with my food and being honest with myself about the food I was eating. Like I remember eating Chex Mix and thinking to myself, yeah, this is healthy, and like lying to myself and then being like, no, Deej, this is not. Like, let's make a better decision here. Like, what's this plus one rep in this area? Right. So I started to count more macros and become more honest with myself about the food I was eating, and on a daily basis, making sure that I was exercising and to your point, right, exercising to a point where it was like actually raising my heart rate and I was actually sweating, and I wasn't, what you said on our Pat show, right? I wasn't just jump roping for 45 seconds and checking the box, right? I wanted to do something that was painful and that really got me going. And then mentally actually creating a mental fitness practice that I do every day that helps me be clear up top and strong between the ears. And so those things all became very important to me. And I think I was consistently trying to figure out, where is it right now? Where do I really want it to be? And those were how I was kind of, I think, having that extra rep in each of those categories of my life.
Beautiful. There's one thing that stuck out to me. You wanted to do something painful. What do you mean by that?
I wanted to do something that I didn't want to do.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of the most beautiful things life has to offer. And doing things that you really don't want to do is not for everybody. And I'm not going to sit up here and say you have to do things you do not want to do. I'm going to say that there's some people who really value it. And I'm personally one of those people who thinks that being consistent with certain things in your life on a daily basis and taking yourself serious enough to make those things serious in your life is really important. And it might not necessarily be things that you actively want to do every day, right? Like, and we were talking about this a little bit offline. Like, do I really want to wake up at 5 a.m. and go throw, medicine balls at the wall and go throw dumbbells around and go, do pull-ups and push-ups and rowing?
I don't.
Right? I don't want to do it at all. And frankly, every morning I wake up, the first thought through my head is, could I skip this workout? Could I make it up sometime throughout the rest of the day? And it's this uncomfortable decision of like, if you make this decision, you're going to know about it. And nobody else will know about it, but you will. And so when you're on stage talking to thousands of people about discipline, you're going to remember that those couple of days you slept in. Right. And that's something that I try to be very honest about it, where it's like, hey, in a month, I might accidentally sleep in one day. Right. But in a year, I might get really good, right? I might get really specific in 1 month. And I was really good that 1 month. Right. And I track everything that I do. So then I could go back and actually look at the evidence of like, okay, how was I this month with my consistency and my disciplined behaviors? And so I think the more uncomfortable things we do, the more comfortable of a life we live.
The more uncomfortable things we do, the more comfortable of a life we live.
Yeah.
I love that. And you've embraced discomfort. I want to take a step back for a moment because I like to dive right in. Mm-hmm. Right now, like you're a mental fitness coach. You're helping a lot of young adults with their mental fitness. Acres of Diamonds is your business. And you had mentioned early in this conversation that like at one point you were having mental discipline, health issues. And now you're the person that's doing difficult things for fun and helping other people basically achieve mental fitness. So like let's start from that darker place. Cause I want to kind of get your background. Like at one point you weren't mentally fit.
No. And I think every day is a day that I'm trying to get more mentally fit. And I wasn't mentally fit at basically what had happened was I had a great childhood, fantastic childhood. And I grew up in a strict household. I had a father who really, he fathered me with love, care, and discipline and consistency and positive behaviors. And I'm beyond grateful for that, as well as a mother who was super loving and super caring. And basically what had happened was upon graduating college, I had this job that I loved, absolutely loved the people, loved the work. And I saw this like big, beautiful career with this business. And I ended up getting fired from this job in a very interesting way. And I had all these beliefs that I was dumb and that I wasn't strong enough to figure out how to hold that job. And all those beliefs, it's a time for probably some deeper storytelling, but they were established with two things that happened to me when I was little. I had a graphic injury to my left arm, and I was put into extra classes around second or third grade because I was slow at school. I created these two beliefs that I was dumb and I was weak. And that's ultimately what I believed in. And I set out on this mission to try and disprove it. And I felt like I'd finally kind of disproved it, getting this really cool internship, and it was going to lead into a job. And then when they fired me, it like lit all of those beliefs on fire. And I didn't know what to do. And I didn't know like how to handle it. And it was just a challenge that I just didn't really know how to face. And I remember like coping with social media because it numbed the feelings that I was experiencing. And I remember going out and drinking on Thursdays and Fridays and Saturdays and like loving it because it was removing me from my reality. And I didn't have to really focus on these nasty things that I didn't want to focus on. And what ended up happening was I got to a point where I was pretty scared, like every day with the thoughts that were going on in my head. And I was like, I don't know how to really handle with this. And so I actually ended up reaching out to my mom, and I told her, I said, I need help. I said, and I don't really know what that means. And so she actually referred me to a therapist, and I remember calling the therapist and actually hanging up on her because I felt, I think, embarrassed. I think I felt weak, and I didn't like the person I had become. Like, it had gotten to that point where I really needed to call a therapist. Like, you have a great life, Deej, right? You're a good young man. You have a college education. You had a great childhood. It's like, I almost felt guilty for feeling that way.
Mm.
And what ended up happening was I actually, right after the therapist interaction, I'd reached out to a mentor of mine, and I basically said, hey, I need some help. I said, I don't know what I need help with. I said, but I need help. And so we met at a Starbucks at like 8 a.m. on like a Saturday morning, and we talked for 2-3 hours. And that was the best I had felt in like the past like 6-7 months. And so then I was like, hey, can we meet again? And so we ended up basically meeting again on like a Tuesday. And for the next 3 years of my life, that's what we did. We met 2 to 3 times a week and just talked about, how do we get through challenges? How do we make sure that our mental fitness is at a level to handle the challenges of modern life? And what does this look like from a leadership standpoint, right? How can we lead ourselves to ultimately then connect with others and then lead others to do this type of behavior? And at the end of those 3 years, I was like, can we teach people how to do what we're talking about in these meetings? Right. And I was like, and because I was like, I'm not a registered therapist. I'm not a counselor. I'm not any of that. I'm like, I just want to talk about this with other people. And he's like, I think we can totally do it. And that's actually how the business started.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I think it's amazing. So you're obviously not dumb or weak, and you're physically very strong, but I don't think you're mentally dumb or weak. But a lot of people wait until the pain is too unbearable to make the decision to change. Like, they're required to. You made a call and you said, I need help, and I don't even know why I need help. Like,
yeah,
you're proactive. Do you think a lot of people are far more reactive and could be more proactive to kind of tackle these kind of things?
Yeah, I think people who might not necessarily take a proactive decision may start to think that it's normal. And they might just start to say, oh, I guess this is what life is. Right? I guess I have to be stressed and anxious and uncertain and afraid every day. And I just have to get used to this feeling. And there are some people who might want to actively live like that. And that's okay, right? That's their decision. Yet there is a other way to live. There is another way to live where we actually take the time to understand, all right, why might I be feeling this way? And why might I think these thoughts? And what could I do to better progress myself towards what I want in this life? And one of my biggest strategies that I actually use 2 strategies, and it's actually on my shirt. So my shirt says "Be here." And so it's just a consistent reminder for me to not try and think about tomorrow, not try and think about yesterday, just be here and literally use whatever I have with whatever I got, right? Like, whatever I know right now is what I have to use to get to where I want to go. And the second thing is, I ask myself, now what? Right? It's like, oh, you just broke your leg. You just failed this test. Girlfriend just broke up with you. You just lost this client. Got it. Now what? Right? And I think a lot of people just sit there because they're almost paralyzed by the actual experience. And to the point, I understand, right? There's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of thoughts going on in your head when those things happen. Yet once we get to a point where we've kind of digested it, we understand this is a real thing now. What are we going to do about it? Right? Like, now what? Like, when people say, oh, I have stress and I have anxiety, it's like, gotcha. And what are you doing about it? Right? Like, what are the active things you're doing on a daily basis? And so, not to get off topic, because I could go very deep into that topic as well.
Yeah.
I think it's a matter of, do you think, like, how do you actually want to live your life? Like, what are the decisions that you are willing to make to live the life that you ultimately want.
I kind of want to go on that tangent with you. I'm music background. I like to improvise a little bit. And on your show, we joked about like Jocko Willink mixed with Joe Dispenza.
Yeah.
And you can Google these people if anyone doesn't know them, but Jocko Willink is very much discipline equals freedom. Like something bad happened, good, let's go crush it. And then Joe Dispenza is way more spiritual and, you know, be here in the now, be patient, you know, more the spiritual end of things. And I love you almost bridge the gap between the two. Be here, but now what? Because I always wonder if I'm fully present, am I goal oriented? And if I'm too goal oriented, am I fully present? And kind of what I'm hearing is like, you want to be present, you want to be aware, you want to take time to breathe, you want to be here now, but then what happens next? It's kind of partnering the calmness and the spirituality with the grind and the go-getter attitude. So I think that's brilliant. Do you do that on purpose? To me, it's like a yin and a yang.
Yeah, I think there's a balance there, right? I think there's a balance to find, like, do I want to live my life like Jocko Willink or do I want to live my life like Joe Dispenza? Well, I kind of want to live my life like a mixture of Jocko Willink and Joe Dispenza. Right? And I think one of the things that we can actively try our best at is how can I have really high expectations for myself while also being able to forgive myself and
holding
those both in the frame at the same time, right? Like I've had clients ask me, what do you do when you don't stay consistent with something? Or what do you do when you make the undisciplined decision? I say, I forgive myself as fast as I can. And then I try to figure out how to get back to the path that I want to be on. And I think sometimes we get consistency backwards or we don't fully understand it, where if I want to say, eat an apple a day for 30 days and I miss it on like day 16 and you're all pissed off and you're like, damn it. Right. Like I'm not consistent. I can't be consistent with things. And then you stop. Right. And then the remaining 14 days you're eating junk food and whatever. It's like, well, what if you just continued to eat the apple on day 17 and you then made 29 out of those 30 days? Right? That's a 95% consistency rate. That's pretty good, right? Like if you expand 95% out over a longer period of time, that's pretty damn good. And so I think when we try to be consistent with things, we try to be perfect with these things. And it's like, don't try to be perfect. Try to simply just outlast. Like how long can you just keep going with the thing? And I think that's where one of the things that I've actively tried to do was, there are days where I might not hit my macro goal, or I might not hit my sleep goal, or I might not hit my movement goal. Got it. Okay. I forgive myself. Boom. What are we doing tomorrow to do it? And we just outlast, right? And we just kind of keep going. And so I think that's a really important skill for people to actively try to do when you're trying to be consistent with things.
It is. And if you're comfortable, I'm going to put myself on the spot, possibly make myself look like an idiot, but I do it all the time. You kind of coach me through this because I think a lot of us have issues like this. I generally don't do 29 out of 30. There's a new brunch bar that opened near my house, and they have something called Cronut French toast, where it's a French toast, but it's all soft like a croissant. And it's like, it's so cheaty, but part of me wants to eat that every single day. And I don't drink like I used to, but I reserve the right to have, a beer here or there. But I was just on vacation and I drank more than I almost ever would on a typical weekend. So I feel like I do know what I need to do, but I'm kind of cheating on that consistency all the time. And I'm still probably better than most people. I'm kind of making myself sound bad, but I kind of want that cronut French toast daily, man.
So one of the things that I believe about consistency, and I might be wrong with this, I believe we are consistent with the things that are important enough to us to be consistent with. So the reason that I'm consistent with the mind and the body stuff is because of what I said earlier. Because I had these beliefs that I was dumb and weak. And that pain was so painful that it became important enough for me to make this a real thing that I do every day. So in your scenario, right, why is it important for you to be consistent with your diet?
I don't know, man.
Right.
It's
so
funny.
That lack of, right.
It's really funny because like I feel good when my diet's good. I feel energetic when I'm clear minded and I'm working out and I'm doing, but it's like, I was eating cronuts and drinking more often and I was still successful back then. So I can be successful and treat my body like crap and I can still get by.
and frankly, I mean, if that works for you, right? And like, this is kind of like what we were talking about earlier, right? If you want to do that and you're still getting the results that you want in your life, then like be you, right? Do your thing, right? If you want to eat those things. Yet if it comes to a point where there's a pain now, right? That's where it's like, okay, now I want to make a change, right? And so I actively, there's this story that I love to tell. I originally heard it from Darren Hardy, actually told it. Long story short, there's two dogs on a porch and this man is walking by these two dogs and he notices that one of the dogs is whimpering. The owner of the dogs is standing behind the two dogs. And the man walks up to the owner and says, "Why is that dog whimpering?" And he says he's sitting on a nail. And he says, "Well, why doesn't he move?" And he says, "It must not be painful enough." And so the moral of the story is we won't move until it's painful enough.
Yeah.
Right. And so I actively try when I'm working with young men or whether I'm working with somebody on a one-on-one thing, it's like, talk to me about the pain of not doing this. Like, what does it feel like? And like, I literally had a young man I was working with yesterday who was actively trying to wake up early and do a morning routine, kind of some stuff that we were talking about earlier. And his pain was what he calls himself if he doesn't wake up earlier. And I'm not going to share it just because it was kind of his thing and it's a little bit personal, but it was this negative self-talk that was very painful. And I could tell that when I started to push deeper into it, he was getting angry with it, right? He's like, no. And he was kind of pushing back at me. And I'm like, okay, can you see how this actually pisses you off? Now let's use that. And that's where like this idea of using what you have right now, like whatever you have right now, use it. First rule of entrepreneurship, I think, is like use whatever you have like right now. Yeah. Use the pain. Use that negative self-talk. Use the dark thoughts that you don't want to talk about with anybody and use those to actually push you into the thing that you want to be consistent with. Because we don't want the pain to become the normal thing. Right? And one of the exercises that I'll walk people through is I want you to picture the pain of not doing that thing every single day for as long as we work together. Right. And whether it's negative self-talk, whether it's a belief, whether it's something that they learned from their parents, whatever it might is that really grinds their gears. I want you to picture that happening every single day of your life. Right. Then that starts to get like, you have this emotional reaction to it. And you're like, oh my God, I think I'm going to wake up at 6 a.m. Right. And you start to push yourself into these patterns then, and then it becomes a little bit easier.
I love this. And I'm thinking to myself, like, even asking the question, justifying the cronut and asking the question is actually a sign that I'm probably not super confident in the decisions I'm making. I'm in a little bit of pain. And if I were to multiply this pain, yikes, that could get really, really bad. So let's assume we understand we have a little bit of a problem. Feel free to go like fitness analogy. I know it might turn some listeners off, but you're a CrossFitter. I just hired a trainer less than a year ago. You talk about like mental fitness. And I always like the analogy of like doing bicep curls for the mind. Yeah. And like, so I understand I have a problem. What kind of bicep curls for the mind? What kind of reps can I do to not be defined by the pain or not be defined by mistakes in the past and actually create the habits and consistency for a way better tomorrow? Like, you already gave us a couple tips, but what else comes to mind in terms of bicep curls for the mind?
Yeah, so that's a great kind of way to explain mental fitness. Is if you think about like a gym, right? We go into a gym and let's say you have a barbell with 45 pounds on each side, it's 135 pounds. Depending upon your physical strength is your ability to lift that weight. So let's picture that weight as being a problem or a stress in your life. If you start to add more weight onto that bar, eventually you're going to get to a point where you can't lift it, right? The problem has become so big and so painful and so large that I'm not strong enough to actually handle this thing.
You know why I'm smiling, and I won't derail you, is I'm imagining like having a 245-pound plate problem, but never actually going to the gym before. What's going to happen when I try to lift that?
Exactly. Right.
I'm going to hurt myself.
Right. So the majority of people in hurting yourself mentally is I'm stressed and I'm anxious on a daily basis. I'm overwhelmed. Right. It's these feelings of I don't feel like I'm enough. Right. I don't feel like I'm making progress. And hurting yourself physically is, I just pulled my hamstring. Right. Or I pulled my back out. Right. Or because I wasn't strong enough to lift this physical weight. Well, now let's take all these things and let's bring them outside of the gym. There are what I like to call life weights. And so a lot of like the work that we'll do. So like I'm actually in the process of developing a program for CrossFit athletes. We actually use terms where it's like, hey, what's your life weight? My life weight is balancing my work and my personal life, right? That stresses me out. It's a weight that pushes back on me, yet it pushes back on me mentally, not physically. It's like, all right, so now let's train our mind like a muscle here. And let's think about this, right? If I was to make my physical muscles stronger, thicker, what would I do? I would train my body, right? I would work on my nutrition. I would work on my sleep. And those are some deeper things when it comes to the mind, but it's like, all right, now let's take that same concept and let's do it for our mind. I would train my mind. It's like, all right, what does it mean to actually train your mind? Well, the first thing that I ever did when it came to like training my mind was what my business partner and I did in our 3 years of meeting. We were basically asking each other uncomfortable questions, difficult questions that caused us to put pressure to our thinking, and then for 5 to 10 minutes at a time, and then relax, and then take a break, and then do it again. And so if you think about like growing a muscle, you apply pressure to it, and then you let it rest. And over time, it gets stronger and it can lift more of that physical weight. Right. And so the first thing to train your mind is I heard this saying once that really will tie into this. Your life is a reflection of the questions you are willing to be asked or ask yourself. Right. And so if we are willing to be asked questions that we might not want to answer because we might not be at that point of like really looking at that scary thing in the closet or that scary thing under the bed, that's where we're actually going to get mentally fit or strong enough to start to handle whatever these life weights are that we want to lift. So that's one of the ways that, ask yourself these deep questions that cause you a little bit of tension, mental tension.
Give us examples of these kind of questions.
I would say one, what am I not doing that I know if I did would get me where I wanted to go? Right. And that's kind of a longer question, but I mean, you can ask yourself questions around, what am I really afraid of? Why do I care so much about what others think of me? If you really knew me, ... Right. Questions like that, where it's like, right, these are, you're peeling yourself back a little bit, and you don't have to share these answers with people, right? This is for your own personal ability to handle stress and challenge in your life.
The last one just hit hard. If someone really knew me, ... If someone doesn't have a pen or paper, don't necessarily do this now. I mean, you can pause this and do it right now, but write down a note answering that one question, like mental fitness, marketing, personal growth, like that question hit me hard because I'm like, oof, I need to focus on myself before I start focusing on others.
Mm-hmm.
Or else I'm going to get lost in the sauce. I think we talked about this on your show. Like, we can scroll Instagram and see what everybody else is doing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what do I want to do?
Yeah.
What is my purpose? This is a big question, but let me ask you this. What do you want to do? What does Deej want to do? What is your purpose? Like what, and this could change. I know that there's no perfect answer, but like, why do you feel like you are put on this earth? What are you trying to accomplish, man?
To help people feel smart, strong, and capable. And the reason that that's my purpose and my passion is because I didn't feel smart, strong, and capable. Right? Because of those two things that happened for me. And I'm going to say they happened for me in my life.
Yeah.
And it was a very internal battle because I had great parents and I had great friends and I had a beautiful upbringing and I could not ask for anything better than what I had. Yet that challenge was internal, and I'm really hoping I'm not the only person who's ever struggled with those internal battles of not feeling smart, not feeling strong, or not feeling capable.
What does feeling smart, strong, and capable look like to you?
I think it's being honest with yourself.
Yeah.
I think it's, and this is why the questions I think are such a good place to start. It's being honest with yourself, even if the answers aren't that great.
Mm.
And I think when it comes to like intelligence and your physical ability, I mean, we all want to feel strong. We all want to feel smart, and we all want to feel capable. Yet I've had many moments, and I've had many moments in my life where I have felt really smart and I have felt really strong and I have felt really capable. And at the same time, I've had tons of other moments where I didn't feel those things. And I felt like a loser, and I felt like a loner, and I felt like I messed up and I let people down. And if we aren't equipped mentally to know how to get through that, I think that could stay with us for a really long time.
You work with a lot of young adults, a lot of young men.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a common struggle for us men?
Yeah, because I think men, we've been raised to fix things, and we've been raised to be okay with being alone and knowing how to solve challenges. And there's this video that we send to all of our clients on, I think it's like week 4, week 5 of our emotional intelligence program, where there's this woman and she's talking to a man and she has a nail in her head. Like, it's not a real nail. It's just like for the video. And the guy is like, hey, you got a nail in your head? And he's like, and she's just talking, like, she just wants him to sit there and listen to him.
Yeah.
And the guy's like, you got a nail in your head. Like, I think I know the problem. And the moral of the story is men are wired to want to fix things all the time. And it's like, sometimes we just need to sit down and listen. Right. And it's a good exercise for anybody, right? We don't always have to fix people's problems. Sometimes they just really actually want us to listen. Right. And so I think as men, we've been raised to be expected to know what to do, be expected to have the answer, have the solution, and admitting, hey, I could use some help, or hey, I'm not doing that well, is a sign of weakness. When, as we discussed on my show, right, having the courage to actually say, hey, I could actually use some help here. That's what, that's toughness right there. Right. That takes some heart to do that. Right. And I can remember being a young man expecting my father to always have an answer.
Sure.
Right. I mean, you think about like, growing up as a young kid, you have your mom and your dad, like they are literally in charge of keeping you alive. There's a ton of reliance on them. So when there is a problem, or when there is a challenge, the only thing I know is that they are going to have a solution to it. And so I think that's what a lot of these young men that I work with, they may have these expectations of themselves that have just been passed down. Right. And I'm not saying to always say, hey, I need help. I have problems. I have this, I have that. It's coming back to that smart, strong, and capable, where we're just being honest with ourselves. Right. Because there are times in our lives where we're like, hey, I'm actually kicking ass right now. Like I'm doing really good and I feel really proud, and that's cool. And let's stay there. Right. And let's celebrate that. Yet at times there may also be some opportunities to ask for some help and to not feel guilty about it. Right. And to use some coaching and be coachable and be willing to change. And so that's, I think, what kind of, to put it, I feel like I kind of went on a little bit deep there, but I feel like that's a lot of these young men I kind of focus on with them.
So it's fair to say we're not going to always be winning. We're not always going to be freaking sailing into the sunset on a magic carpet. Things might get kind of dark or sad or depression at times. Working with all these young men, like you already touched on it, but what do you tell them? And granted, there's young men listening to the show. There's older men, there's women, there's all kinds of people listening to the show, all kinds of genders. It can be general advice, but I know you deal with a lot of these young, and are they struggling? A lot of times they probably aren't struggling. They just want to get better, right?
So I think it's a little mixture of both. Like some of the young men that I work with are pretty dialed in. They know what they're actively working for. And then some of them are just kind of like, I just need some guidance and I need some support, and people to kind of like bounce ideas off of, because a lot of the times what happens is it's actually the parents who are like, hey, my son seems to be struggling. He might not be himself. Right. And this is where like the parent wants to help the son, but doesn't want to say there's something wrong with my son. And the son secretly wouldn't mind the assistance in the coaching, yet doesn't want to admit they want to change, right? Or there's a problem, right? And so it's like, it's this balance of saying, hey, like, this isn't therapy. This isn't counseling. This is mental fitness training, right? And so, I mean, I'll have sessions where I'll literally talk to guys about like talking to girls, right? Or like social media, or like, hey, like, should I stop drinking like this much? And it's like, well, how much are it, right? And we'll have like things where they're like simple conversations, but they're just conversations they might not have wanted to have with their parents or a teacher. And so they're just more honest conversations about the things that they're actually kind of focusing on. And so what I've really done is I've kind of narrowed it down to the 3 C's. And the way that I kind of do this is I'll meet the young men where they are to the best of my ability and ask them, hey, in this session, do we want to work on something that like you specifically want to work on? If not, I can kind of take the lead here and I can walk you through some things to help you with your 3 C's. And those 3 C's are clarity. First one is clarity, which we actually talked about, right? And clarity can be defined, and I define it as there's internal clarity, which is understanding who you are. So I often think about like, what are 3 things that you can tell me that would show me who you are? And it could be a story. It could be a quote. It could be a value, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be anything specific, but if you were to tell me, what would that be? So then I could be like, oh, this guy really values love, or this guy really values connection, or this guy really values his family, right? Whatever it might be. So that first thing is clarity. It's that internal clarity. And then the second is the external clarity. What do you want out there? Right? What do you want to create out there? And that's usually where it's like, I don't know yet. Right. And so that's, I think, one of the harder things is, and we talked a little bit about this, right? Understanding what is it that I really want with life. And so that's the first C. And then the second C is confidence. And confidence is merely just, I believe confidence is the absence of fear. And so if I'm confident with something, I'm not afraid of it. And if I'm confident with something, I have to what we talked about on my show, right? Building that evidence, right? In those dark days. Like if I have hours and hours of evidence that I can do this thing at a competent level, then I'm probably going to be confident with it. Right? I use the example, like if somebody was to put a target 20 yards away from me and give me a football and ask me how many times could I hit that target, I'd say probably every time, because I've done it 1,000 times.
Wow.
Right. I played college or high school football as a quarterback. I was like, I threw that route hundreds of times. It's like, so I could probably do that because I have tons of evidence that I can do it. And I believe that I can do it. So there's no fear involved there. And so that second C is addressing with these young men. It's like, what are we actually afraid of? And what do we want to be confident with? Whether it's confident with your nutrition, your exercise, your sleep, your professional life, your personal life, your romantic life. And so just addressing the fear in those areas helps them be more confident. And the last is consistency. And I think consistency is a quiet formula to trusting yourself more. Right? Like if I'm consistent behind closed doors, I'm going to trust myself more because I'm doing things without others' recognition. Like I'm going to trust that I'm going to make that decision. And so a lot of these young men, they really just want to be consistent with certain things. They want to repetitively do one thing over and over again to almost prove to themselves that they can do it. A lot of these young men, like a lot of them are working on whether it's an exercise consistency, whether it's a morning routine consistency, whether it's a meditation consistency, reading consistency, training consistency, right? We're merely just developing systems and processes to be repetitive and to almost be predictable with the things that we're doing, because it's going to help them get more of what they want with their first C of that clarity. So those are what we focus on when they don't necessarily have something that they specifically want to focus on.
Clarity, confidence, consistency.
Clarity, confidence, consistency.
Do you struggle with any of these, or are you kicking ass in all categories?
I'm a student of my own teaching. I'm in this work just as much as they are. And actually it's pretty cool because some of the young men that I work with are in their late 20s. So I'm 28. So some of these guys are 28, 29, 30. It's like, I'm like, dude, I'm struggling with that too. Like, can you coach me on it? Like, how can we collectively help each other here? So I think that relationship feels a little bit better than maybe a person in their 50s who was a counselor or a therapist. And I'm not bashing them at all. I think their work they do is extremely needed. Yet sometimes I wouldn't mind somebody who's kind of my age or has been through struggling with social media or struggling with their mental atmosphere, right? To really connect with me where it's like, yeah, I'm actually right there with you, right? Like, let's help each other do this, like collectively. And I've seen that a lot with a lot of the group work that we do with our business clients, right? They see that they're not alone with the challenges that they're facing. And so I'm actively trying to bring kind of like this group coaching element into the young men because they're going to notice that they're not alone, right? With a lot of these challenges. So, and that feels really good.
A lot of people feel like they are alone.
Yeah.
Or even if you recognize you're not alone, a lot of this work's kind of happening independent in a silo where you're doing the work. Sometimes it's nice to see that other people are doing the work with you.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Feels good. It feels good. One, I think watching and realizing other people are challenged with similar things that you are. Yet I also love seeing like success of other people. Right. And like that inspires me. Like, I think there's a very interesting idea around, do you get jealous or do you get inspired? Right. Like when you see other people do good things, it's like, oh, wow, that's what's possible. It's like, holy cow, I could do that. I could do that because they're a human and I'm a human. Right. They're making some decisions that I might not be. It's like, all right, I guess. And this is where it's like, figure out what you want, go find someone who's got it, and then kind of start to do what they're doing, right? Change that behavior. So I think there's a lot of teaching just in that kind of principle of, is it jealousy or inspiration?
Dude, I know we're calling back to the episode on your show a ton, so people need to go check that out. But we brought up briefly Anthony Trucks on that show. And another thing he taught me on my podcast was, I forget exactly how I asked it, but I basically talked about all these people posting the Lamborghinis and the girlfriend that's kind of just a model that they rented for the day. And, maybe they do have a 6-pack abs and their parents have money, so they're able to buy things and look like they're successful. And like, I kind of brought this up, like, how do you feel about these scammy people, these douchebags out there? And he kind of called me out on it. He's like, so you don't want the Lambo, maybe the the looks of your girlfriend's not as important. Maybe these things aren't as important to you, but you can't dismiss that they were to achieve some level of competence. And so instead of dismissing them, let's look for what we actually can extract and what we actually like, the good in it. What can we learn from it? And it was like such an eye opener for me because like I see someone, now let's assume they earned this and they made money. Like I see someone driving a Lambo, like flashy, I'm judging them, which that's a conversation in itself. But really the question is like, what did they get to even get to the level where they can pay for that Lambo? Because it's not all bad.
Yeah.
So I'm learning all the time, man. I judge people and I'm like, I don't have to necessarily agree with their usage, but I need to at least see what got them there.
Yeah, I completely agree with that idea of like not, and this is the kind of like that curiosity thing, right? Like, I don't know what anybody's story is until they, and frankly, they could tell me what their story is. And I don't even know if that's ultimately the truth. Right. And there's this great quote by Abraham Lincoln that said, I don't like that man. I must get to know him.
I love that. Yeah.
Right. And I often think about that quote where if I see a guy in a Lamborghini and I'm like, you know, what a douchebag. Right. Now it's kind of like, all right, here's the jealousy and here's the inspiration. Right. I could be jealous of what he has. And really what it is it's just a reflection of my own ego being smashed a little bit as I climb into my car with my girlfriend and he has the Lamborghini with the rented model. Right. It's my problem that's actually getting surfaced. The inspiration side is, I wonder what he did to get that. Right. I wonder, you know, who he became or who she became to get that thing that caused me to also want that thing. Right. Like, what is the story? What is their strategy? And it's funny. I'm thinking about bringing this up. Do you know who Dan Bilzerian is?
I do.
All right. So stick with me here on this one.
Yeah.
He wrote a book. Have you read the book at all?
No.
So I don't recommend it for everybody because it's fairly graphic and he doesn't hold anything back. I had a buddy of mine say, dude, you got to read this book. It's really entertaining. It's hysterical. Like, you'll love it. And he was giving it to me from the entertainment standpoint.
Yeah.
And I was like, and I had this huge judgment and said, I'm not reading that book. Like, I don't agree with that guy and the things he does and blah, 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 judging the hell out of him. And I remember a day went by and I was like, you know what? He's done something to get him to where he is. And I could probably learn something from him. And so I called my buddy and I said, I'll actually read the book. And so I ended up actually buying the book and I read it and I learned a ton about psychology. And it was merely about how you interact with other people and giving yourself self-worth instead of automatically putting everybody above you and then they perceive you as below them. And he used it in the way that he personally talked to women. Yet I looked at it and I was like, this is any interaction with a human, really. And so it was, I needed to take a step back and realize, okay, I'm jealous here, right? I feel some negative emotion when I think about reading this book, yet what's the inspiring view on this? Like, I could probably learn something from this. And I did end up learning something and I was happy that I read it.
Yeah, it's so funny that you mentioned that because a guest on this show, I shouldn't even be bringing up this episode, Michael Sartain, is good friends with Dan Bilzerian, talked about him on the show, this and that. And his team reached out to me to be on the show. And I almost didn't say yes, because if you look at his work and what he does and the things he talks about, like, I disagree with like 70% of it. I had a lot of preconceived judgments. And then I said to myself, that's exactly why I'm going to bring him on the show.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's that it's cool to not always agree with somebody.
And I didn't bring them. I'm not a combative person. I'm here to learn. I'm here to really just kind of be a student and figure stuff out as I go. So I didn't like push back on a lot of what he said. I did ask kind of interesting questions to dive deeper. And transparently, at the end of the interview, I felt terrible about how it went. I wanted to I had a preconceived note. So here's the short version. He is flashing the yacht, the girls, the life. He's teaching guys how to, build networking groups to pick up these girls and social status and all this stuff. And the question I wanted to get answered was, are you happy? And I never really had that question answered. We focused so much on the tactics and so much on what he's doing. And he kind of pitched his program a lot. I'm just being transparent with you. And I didn't get the questions I wanted answered. So I almost didn't put out the podcast at all. And that's why I put the podcast out.
Yeah.
Because it's all part of the journey. Like my insecurity was exactly why I did it. And it was exactly why I put it out. And exactly why a few people reached out to me and they didn't like the interview. And I was I was like, me neither, dude. That's part of this journal. That's part of this process. I'm not going to have this conversation and not share it because I feel uncomfortable that people are going to judge me. This is the conversation. Here it is. And I still don't know if there's a strong lesson at the end of this statement here, but it's learning from people you disagree with. You can still leave the conversation disagreeing with them, but it was still worthwhile to have that conversation. And I think other people can come to a conclusion themselves as well by listening to that conversation.
Yeah. And I once heard Jay Shetty say, what do you believe that others don't? And that was initiating this understanding that there's going to be things that I think are right that you might not think are right. And that's okay. It's encouraged, actually. Right. And it's good to have that contrast of, hey, here's what I think is right. Well, have you thought about this? This is where we kind of get into that strong opinions loosely held type of idea where I have beliefs and I have things that I think are right. And I'm willing to be wrong with those beliefs in those things. And I think that's a really important skill.
Let's kind of, I could talk to you forever. For behind the scenes, we've been talking for almost 2.5 hours,
I know,
almost 2 hours of published content. So we will start wrapping it up, but I'm curious, what are some of the things that you believe that others possibly don't?
I do believe that every event that happens to you can be turned into a gift or an opportunity. Having said that, it takes a certain level of mental fitness to get to those points of being able to see the gift or the opportunity. So I'll give you an example I think that might make this a little simpler to understand.
Yeah.
In 2022, my grandfather passed away from cancer after 6 years of a battle with cancer. And he was and still is to this day my favorite human in the world. When he had passed away, if somebody would have told me, hey, find the gift and find the opportunity, right? I would have told them some nasty things that I'm not going to say on this podcast, right?
Yeah.
What I did was I allowed myself to miss him. I allowed myself to realize I was never going to get to shake his hand again, right? Or never get to hear his voice and these little things that I loved about him. And what ended up happening was I made the decision to feel that. And I wasn't trying to be toxically positive with the fact that he was passing away. And I was trying to find this gift and this opportunity. Once I had gotten to a point where I was ready to make the decision to go somewhere else with the event, that's when I started to look for it. And I think when we have these really hard events in our lives, allowing yourself to feel the emotion of it, allowing yourself to feel the reality of it, is a necessary part of getting to the point of actually finding the gift and the opportunity. It's almost like lifting a weight, right? You walk into that gym and you try to do your 245-pound deadlift and you end up blowing out a hamstring. It's like, no, I actually needed to warm up, right, for a couple months, right? I needed to do 185 a couple times, then 205, then 225, right? I needed to slowly metabolize this experience and then get to this point where I was ready to make the decision to go somewhere that I wanted to go with it. And once I got to that point, then I started to find the gift and I started to find those opportunities. And this is actually one of the stories I talk about in the keynote presentation that I give, is how we basically have a choice when it comes to challenges. And we can either let the challenge win, and we can let that challenge make us feel sad and stressed for as long as we want, or ultimately we can win when we're ready to win. And we can go find a gift or an opportunity in that. And the gift that I found in my grandfather passing away was it brought me closer to my mom and my grandma. And what ended up happening was I started taking them out to dinner every month, and we would have just these awesome conversations that I don't think we would have had if he hadn't passed away. And these were two women who have been a part of successful marriages. And I was a single guy and still am a single guy right at that point. So they were teaching me about like love and connection. And I don't know if there's a lot of young men who get that type of experience from their mom and their grandma, teaching them about like what it means to be like a good husband, what it means to be a good man, right, from a female perspective. And so that's what I'm choosing to look at with that challenge.
I love this. And I know we talked a lot about young men, but for the ladies still listening, we got DJ's Instagram in the show notes. It sounds like he's single. Send him a DM.
More than welcome to.
Say what's up. Say what's up. You know, first off, do that if you'd like to. But jokes aside, like, how can we continue to support you? The podcast is great. Like, how can we be of support?
Yeah. So the podcast is called Libraries and Weight Rooms. And it's basically the idea of how we can do hard things better through both mental and physical fitness. As Ben mentioned, you can follow me on Instagram. I post content Monday through Friday at DJ Logory, Logory. And the young man business, you can just go to djlogory.com. We have that just basically redirected right to a page where we kind of explain what we're helping young men with. And if you're more on the corporate side and you're interested in emotional intelligence training for your business, you can go to our Acres of Diamonds site, which is youracresofdiamonds.com.
Boom. We talked for almost 2.5 hours, like two of it being online. To give you the torch to close out, between the two conversations we just had, give us like 3 major takeaways that we can take home with us and go crush it.
So curiosity is a superpower. That would be number 1. Second thing is holding yourself to a high standard while also forgiving yourself. And the third thing is use pain as a resource.
Oh, I want to go like 10 layers deep again with you. We're going to have to do this again, man.
Yeah.
I'm subscribed to the show, but I haven't left a review, so I will leave you a review. I'm following you on Instagram.
To yours as well. I love this. This is awesome.
Yeah, man. Let's talk soon. I appreciate your time today.
I thank you so much, Ben. I really appreciate everything you've done for me, and I really appreciate the time on the show today. So thank you, man.
Cool.